The dying mother bear. Seeing the tears of this human baby, what happened next shocked everyone. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The forest grew quiet as evening approached. Shadows lengthened across the small wooden cabin where Lily Morgan had just put her 10-month-old daughter Emma to bed. The cabin stood alone at the edge of Pinewood Forest, miles from the nearest neighbor. Lily's husband, Jacob, was away on a 3-day fishing trip, leaving mother and daughter to enjoy the peaceful solitude of nature. Emma was an unusually perceptive baby. Her large blue eyes seemed to take in everything around her, and she responded to the world with a curiosity that sometimes startled her parents. Tonight, however, Emma was restless. She whimpered in her crib as Lily gently stroked her forehead, wondering if her daughter might be coming down with something. "Shh, my sweet girl," Lily whispered. "Everything's all right." But even as she spoke the words, Lily felt an unusual heaviness in the air. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pine trees that surrounded their home. The sound normally soothed Emma, but tonight it only seemed to agitate her more. Lily decided to prepare some herbal tea, hoping its warmth might help her relax enough to sleep. As she filled the kettle, a dull thud from outside made her freeze. It wasn't loud, not like a fallen branch or a woodland creature scampering across their porch. This sound was heavier, more deliberate. With Emma still crying softly in the nursery, Lily peered through the kitchen window. At first, she saw nothing unusual in the dimming light. The forest stood as it always did, a wall of green and brown fading into darkness. But then, a movement caught her eye. Something large was making its way toward their cabin. Lily's heart began to pound as she recognized the unmistakable form of a bear. But this wasn't the confident stride of a healthy predator. The bear moved with painful difficulty, its massive body lurching forward in uneven steps. Even in the fading light, Lily could see dark patches on its fur. Blood, she realized with a start. The mother bear was wounded, and badly. Lily's first instinct was to ensure all doors and windows were locked. She rushed to check each entry point, her hands trembling as she secured the cabin. Emma's cries grew louder, almost as if she sensed her mother's fear. When Lily returned to the nursery to comfort her daughter, she noticed the bear had now collapsed near their front porch, its breathing labored and irregular. From the nursery window, Lily could see the bear's face clearly. What she saw there stopped her cold. Not aggression or wildness, but a profound suffering that transcended species. The mother bear's eyes reflected pain, yes, but also something Lily recognized immediately: concern. Near the fallen bear, 2 tiny cubs huddled together, whimpering as they nudged their mother's still form. Emma's cries suddenly stopped. The baby pulled herself up in her crib, standing on wobbly legs as she stared out the window. For one extraordinary moment, the baby's eyes met those of the dying mother bear. A connection passed between them that Lily couldn't explain but felt deeply in her chest. A recognition between mothers, between vulnerable beings. And then, to Lily's astonishment, tears began to roll down Emma's chubby cheeks. Not tears of fear or discomfort, but something deeper, as if this tiny human understood exactly what was happening to the magnificent creature outside their home. The bear, with what seemed like her last ounce of strength, raised her head toward the window where the crying baby stood watching. The tension in the room changed. Lily felt it like a physical shift in the air. Emma's tears continued to fall, but her cries had transformed into soft, hiccuping sobs. The baby pressed her tiny palm against the window glass, reaching out as if trying to touch the suffering animal. Outside, the mother bear's eyes never left Emma's face. "Emma, sweetheart," Lily whispered, torn between maternal protection and the undeniable power of what she was witnessing. She should pull her daughter away, close the curtains, call for help. But something held her back. The bear wasn't threatening them. She was dying, and somehow, impossibly, Emma knew it. Lily made a decision that would later be called reckless, foolish, even dangerous. But in that moment it felt like the only possible choice. With Emma balanced on her hip, she opened the nursery window just a crack. The cool evening air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth and the metallic tang of blood. Emma's tiny hand reached through the narrow opening, her fingers stretching toward the bear that lay just beyond their reach. The mother bear's labored breathing seemed to slow as she watched the small human's gesture. Her cubs, sensing something profound was happening, grew still beside their mother's massive form. "It's okay," Lily found herself whispering, though whether to Emma or the dying bear she couldn't have said. "It's okay." The bear's eyes began to close, her great head lowering to rest on her front paws. For a terrible moment Lily thought she had already passed. But then, with a monumental effort that spoke of a mother's final, desperate love, the bear nudged her cubs. Once, twice, urging them away from her, toward safety, toward life. The cubs hesitated, confused by their mother's command. They pressed closer to her instead, their small bodies trembling. The mother bear made a soft sound, not a growl, not a roar, but something gentler. A farewell. Emma's tears fell faster now, dropping onto the windowsill. One tear slipped through the open crack, falling through the evening air to land on the porch below. The dying bear's eyes fixed on that single, glistening drop, a child's pure sorrow for a creature she had never known, but somehow understood completely. What happened next would be retold in whispers for years to come, passed from person to person like a legend, a miracle. The mother bear, with strength that should have been impossible, raised herself to her feet. Her wounds still bled, her breath still came in ragged gasps, but she stood. She stood and looked directly at the baby whose tears had fallen for her. Lily held her breath, cradling Emma close. The bear swayed on her feet, clearly fighting to remain upright. Then, in a gesture that defied all natural understanding, she dipped her massive head, once, slowly, before turning to her cubs. With gentle nudges of her muzzle, she guided them toward the trees, away from the cabin, away from the humans who had witnessed her vulnerability. At the edge of the forest, the bear paused. She turned back one final time, her gaze finding Emma's tear-streaked face. Something passed between them, something Lily would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. Then the bear and her cubs disappeared into the gathering darkness. Lily stood at the window long after they had gone, holding her daughter close. Emma's tears had stopped. She rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her small body warm and heavy with approaching sleep. Outside, the forest fell silent, holding its secrets. 3 days later, when Jacob returned from his fishing trip, Lily told him everything. He listened with skepticism that slowly gave way to wonder. Together, they ventured into the woods near where the bear had disappeared. They expected to find her body. No creature so grievously wounded could survive long, especially while caring for cubs. Instead, they found a clearing where the ground had been disturbed, as if something large had rested there. Around this spot, small wildflowers had begun to bloom, weeks ahead of their normal season. Jacob knelt to examine them, his fingers brushing the delicate petals in confusion. "That's impossible," he murmured. "These shouldn't flower until late spring." Emma, strapped to Lily's chest in her carrier, reached out toward the blossoms. Her small face lit with recognition, though she was far too young to have memories of flowers or bears or tears shed for a stranger's pain. As the family turned to leave, A sound caught their attention. A low, gentle huffing from the trees beyond the clearing. They froze, eyes straining to see through the dense foliage. For just a moment, Lily glimpsed a flash of dark fur, a pair of watchful eyes. Not threatening, not afraid. Simply there, acknowledging their presence before melting back into the forest that sheltered and healed her. "She's alive," Lily whispered, her eyes filling with tears of her own. "Emma, look, she's alive." Emma gurgled happily, reaching toward the spot where the bear had been. Her tiny fingers grasped at the air as if holding on to something precious that only she could see. Something miraculous that had begun with a baby's tears for a dying mother bear and ended with healing that science could never explain, but a child's heart had somehow always understood. The story spread throughout their small community, then beyond. Most dismissed it as imagination, coincidence, the desperate hope of a mother alone with her child in the wilderness. But those who knew Lily and Emma best noticed the change in them both. A quiet awareness, a deeper connection to the natural world around them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines, Emma would stop whatever she was doing and turn toward the forest with a smile of recognition, as if greeting an old friend whose life she had touched in a way that transcended understanding. A bear whose pain she had felt, whose recovery she had somehow, impossibly, helped to bring about with nothing more than innocent tears and the purest form of compassion. As months passed, Emma's connection to the forest grew stronger. By her second birthday, she could identify birds by their calls before she could properly pronounce their names. She would toddle to the edge of their yard, point to specific plants, and wait expectantly until Lily or Jacob named them. The local doctor called her a prodigy. Neighbors called her gifted. But Lily knew the truth was both simpler and far more extraordinary. "She's been touched by something we don't understand," she confided to Jacob one night as they watched their daughter sleeping peacefully in her bed. That night with the bear changed her. Jacob had been skeptical at first, attributing Emma's unusual abilities to natural intelligence. But even he couldn't explain what happened the following spring, when Emma, now approaching 3, woke screaming from a nap. "Hurt! Hurt!" she cried, clutching her side. Lily rushed to check her daughter, finding no injuries, no fever, nothing to explain the child's distress. Emma pointed frantically toward the eastern edge of the forest. "There!" "Help!" Jacob, home early from work, exchanged a worried glance with Lily before grabbing his jacket. "Stay with her," he said. "I'll check it out." He returned an hour later, his face ashen. "There's a bear trap out there," he reported quietly, making sure Emma couldn't hear. "Illegal, probably set by poachers. And there's blood, Lily, a lot of it." "The bear," Lily whispered, her heart sinking. Jacob shook his head. "I don't know. Whatever was caught dragged the trap away. I followed the trail until it disappeared into the creek." That night, Emma refused to sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, her small hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming silently down her face. Nothing Lily or Jacob said could comfort her. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't play, wouldn't even speak. She just stared into the darkness of the forest, as if waiting for something only she could see. 3 nights passed this way. Lily grew frantic with worry, considering taking Emma to the hospital, wondering if her daughter's inexplicable connection to the forest had somehow broken her. Then, just before dawn on the 4th day, Emma's demeanor changed. Her tears stopped. A smile spread across her tired face. "Better now," she said simply, climbing back into bed and falling into a deep, peaceful sleep. Later that morning, as Lily hung laundry on the line behind their cabin, she heard a rustling from the tree line. Her heart raced as she recognized the massive form emerging slowly from the shadows. The mother bear, moving with a noticeable limp but very much alive. Behind her followed 3 cubs, the 2 Lily had seen before, now significantly larger, and a smaller third that staggered awkwardly on what appeared to be an injured leg wrapped in. Lily squinted, hardly believing what she was seeing. The smallest cub's wounded leg was crudely but effectively bandaged with what appeared to be torn strips of fabric. Fabric that looked disturbingly similar to the shirt Jacob had been wearing when he investigated the bear trap. "Jacob," Lily called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jacob, come here, now." Her husband appeared at the back door, coffee mug in hand. When he saw the bears, he dropped the mug, porcelain shattering on the porch steps. "Don't move," he warned Lily. "I'll get the rifle." "No." Lily grabbed his arm. "Look at the smallest cub. Really look." Jacob squinted, then his jaw dropped. That's my shirt. The one I was wearing when I checked the trap. I took it off to use as a marker, tied it to a tree branch so I could find my way back. It blew away in the storm 2 nights ago." The mother bear moved forward deliberately, her cubs following close behind. Lily and Jacob stood frozen, uncertain whether to retreat inside. The bear stopped at the edge of their yard, her gaze fixed on their kitchen window, where Emma now stood watching, her eyes bright with recognition. The mother bear made a soft chuffing sound. Her injured cub limped forward, dragging its bandaged leg. It stumbled once, twice, then collapsed in the grass just yards from where Lily and Jacob stood. Without warning, the kitchen door flew open and Emma darted out, moving with determination toward the injured cub. "Emma, no!" Jacob lunged for his daughter, but Lily held him back. "Wait," she whispered, "just wait." Emma knelt beside the wounded cub, her tiny hands hovering over its bandaged leg. The mother bear watched, making no move to protect her young, a behavior so contrary to nature that Jacob later said it defied all logical explanation. "Hurt," Emma said softly, touching the dirty makeshift bandage. "I help." The cub whimpered, but remained still as Emma carefully unwrapped the fabric, revealing a deep, ugly wound still seeping blood. The bear trap had cut to the bone. Lily's maternal instinct finally overcame her fascination. "Emma, come back now," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "The baby bear needs medicine we don't have." But Emma shook her head stubbornly. "I help," she repeated. And then, to her parents' astonishment, she began to cry. Not the typical tears of a frustrated toddler, but deep, silent tears that fell directly onto the cub's wounded leg. The mother bear made no sound, no movement. The 2 larger cubs huddled together, watching. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously as Emma's tears continued to fall, mingling with the cub's blood, washing the wound clean. What happened next would later be dismissed by scientists as impossible, by religious leaders as a miracle, and by local journalists as an elaborate hoax. But Lily and Jacob witnessed it with their own eyes, and their testimony never wavered in all the years that followed. The cub's wound began to close. Not heal gradually, as wounds do with proper care and time, but close. The edges of torn flesh knitting together before their eyes, new tissue forming where moments before there had been only raw, bleeding meat. Emma stopped crying. She looked up at the mother bear with a smile of pure joy. "Better now," she said, echoing her words from earlier that morning. The cub stood, testing its weight on the leg that should have been crippled beyond repair. It took one step, then another. The mother bear made a sound deep in her throat, a rumble that vibrated the air around them. She approached Emma slowly, her massive head lowering until her nose nearly touched the child's forehead. For one breathless moment, Lily was certain they were about to witness a tragedy. She tensed, ready to throw herself between her daughter and what she was sure would be certain death. But Jacob's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Look," he whispered. The mother bear was gently, incredibly gently, touching her nose to Emma's forehead. A gesture of gratitude? Blessing? There were no words in human language to properly describe what passed between the massive predator and the tiny human child. Emma reached up fearlessly, placing her small hand on the bear's muzzle. "Welcome," she said, a word she had only recently mastered. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the bears retreated. The mother bear nudged her cubs toward the forest, including the smallest one who now moved without any sign of injury or pain. At the edge of the trees, she paused, looking back at Emma, at Lily and Jacob still frozen in disbelief. She made that soft chuffing sound once more, a farewell, a thank you, a promise. Then they were gone, swallowed by the shadows of the ancient pines. The story might have ended there, relegated to family legend, a tale told around campfires, but never truly believed. But the world had other plans for Emma Morgan and her extraordinary gift. Word spread quickly through their small mountain community. At first, it was just curious neighbors stopping by with casseroles and questions. Then came the regional newspaper, filming a segment about the bear whisperer of Pinewood. Emma, still too young to understand her sudden fame, continued to play in the yard, occasionally glancing toward the forest with that knowing smile. Scientists arrived next. Biologists, zoologists, experts in animal behavior who scoffed at the story until they witnessed Emma's uncanny connection with the local wildlife firsthand. Birds landed on her outstretched fingers. Deer approached her without fear. Even the notoriously shy foxes that lived near the creek would emerge to watch her play. "There must be a rational explanation," insisted Dr. Rebecca Chen, a renowned animal behaviorist who spent 3 weeks observing Emma. "Perhaps she emits a pheromone that calms animals. Or maybe her size and movements don't trigger their threat responses." But Dr. Chen's theories crumbled when Emma, now 3.5, walked straight into the forest during one of their observation sessions. Lily and Jacob, accustomed to their daughter's harmless wanderings, allowed her to go, with Dr. Chen following close behind, camera in hand. Emma moved with purpose, navigating the dense undergrowth as if following a path only she could see. After 20 minutes, they reached a small clearing where sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns. Emma stopped, sitting cross-legged in a patch of wildflowers. "Wait," she instructed Dr. Chen, who obediently crouched behind a fallen log, camera rolling. What happened in that clearing would change Dr. Chen's career forever. The footage, later analyzed by experts around the world, showed Emma sitting quietly as animals began to emerge from the forest. First came rabbits and squirrels, then a family of raccoons, 2 young foxes, a limping wolf that should have been hunting the smaller creatures instead of joining them. And finally, entering the clearing with deliberate steps, came the mother bear and her 3 cubs, now nearly grown. The bears approached Emma without hesitation, the mother bear settling beside her like an old friend, while the cubs played nearby. "This defies all natural laws," Dr. Chen whispered into her recorder. "Predator and prey together, no signs of fear or aggression. It's as if—" She stopped, scientific vocabulary failing her. "It's as if they're attending some sort of meeting." Emma sat among the gathered animals for nearly an hour. She didn't speak, didn't move much beyond occasionally reaching out to touch the bear's massive paw or stroke a rabbit's ears. But something was happening, a communication beyond human understanding. When Emma finally stood to leave, the animals dispersed, returning to their natural behaviors as if awakening from a shared dream. All except the mother bear, who followed Emma to the edge of the clearing. There, in full view of Dr. Chen's camera, the massive creature rose onto her hind legs, a posture that would normally signal aggression, and placed one paw gently on Emma's shoulder. Emma looked up at the towering bear, her expression serious beyond her years. "I promise," she said clearly. Then she turned and walked back toward her watching parents, the bear dropping to all fours and disappearing into the forest. Dr. Chen's footage went viral within hours of being uploaded. "Miracle Child communes with animals," screamed headlines across the globe. Religious leaders claimed divine intervention. Scientists demanded more studies. Government officials worried about national security implications. For the Morgan family, life changed overnight. Reporters camped at the end of their driveway. Strangers left gifts for Emma, stuffed bears, children's books about animals, even cash and jewelry. Some called her a saint, others called her a fraud. A few, with darker intentions, called her a valuable research subject. "We need to leave," Jacob decided after finding a man with a tranquilizer gun hiding in their garden shed. "This isn't safe for Emma anymore." Lily agreed, heartbroken at the thought of leaving the forest, but determined to protect her daughter. They packed quietly in the middle of the night, planning to slip away before dawn. But as Jacob loaded the last suitcase into their car, Emma began to cry. "Can't go," she sobbed, pointing toward the forest. "They need me." "Who needs you, sweetheart?" Lily asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Emma's answer changed everything. "The forest is dying," she said, her vocabulary suddenly expanding beyond her years. "They showed me. Bad people coming, machines, fire." She looked at her mother with eyes that seemed ancient in her young face. "If we go, everything dies." Jacob and Lily might have dismissed this as a child's imagination, a plea to stay in the only home she'd ever known. But that night, as they debated what to do, 3 logging trucks rumbled past their cabin, heading toward the eastern edge of Pinewood Forest. "Routine maintenance," claimed the foreman when Jacob confronted him the next morning. "Just clearing some fire hazards." But Emma's distress grew as more trucks arrived, followed by men with chainsaws and heavy equipment. "Lying," she told her parents, after they relayed the foreman's explanation. "Cutting everything, building big houses." Jacob made some calls to old friends in the county planning office. What he discovered confirmed Emma's fears. A luxury resort development had been quietly approved. Construction would begin with clearing nearly 1,000 acres of pristine forest, including the areas where the bears and other wildlife made their homes. "We can't fight this," Jacob said grimly. "The permits are signed. The money's already changed hands." But Emma, with the determination only a child can muster, had other ideas. "Need help," she told her parents. "Need bear help." That night, as a gentle rain fell on the forest, Emma slipped out of her bedroom window. Lily discovered her missing an hour later and woke Jacob in a panic. They searched the cabin, the yard, the nearby woods, calling Emma's name with increasing desperation. They found her at dawn, sitting in the same clearing where Dr. Chen had filmed her communing with the animals. Only this time, Emma wasn't alone. Surrounding her in a protective circle were bears. Not just the mother bear and her cubs, but nearly 20 bears of all sizes. Wolves lay nearby, seemingly at peace with their natural enemies. Deer grazed unconcerned by the predators. Birds covered the branches overhead. "Emma!" Lily called, terrified by the wall of powerful animals surrounding her daughter. Emma looked up, her face serene, despite having spent the night in the rain. "They're ready," she said simply. "Ready for what?" Jacob asked, keeping his distance from the gathered wildlife. Emma stood, and as if following a signal, the animals rose too. "To save their home," she replied. What followed would later be called the Pinewood Protest, though those who witnessed it firsthand used other terms: miracle, impossibility, divine intervention. As the logging crews arrived with their equipment, they found their path blocked by animals. Bears standing shoulder to shoulder with wolves, deer, elk, even smaller creatures like raccoons and squirrels forming a living barrier across the access road. The workers laughed at first, revving their engines to scare the wildlife away, but the animals held their ground, showing none of the fear that should have sent them fleeing into the forest. When one impatient driver attempted to push through, his truck was rocked by the combined weight of 3 adult bears pushing against its hood. News crews arrived within hours, capturing footage of the standoff. Emma stood at the front line, a tiny girl surrounded by creatures that could have killed her with a single swipe, but instead formed a protective barrier around her. When reporters shouted questions, she answered with the straightforward logic of a child. "This is their home," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "You can't take it." The logging company sent security, who were reluctant to approach the wall of wildlife. They called animal control, who refused to intervene after assessing the unprecedented situation. Finally, after 3 days of stalemate that captured international attention, the company CEO arrived by helicopter. Marcus Winters was known for his ruthlessness in business. He'd crushed environmental protests before, and had no intention of letting a child and some wild animals stop his most lucrative development to date. He strode toward Emma, flanked by lawyers and security personnel. "This is private property now," he announced, waving a sheaf of documents. "These animals will be relocated humanely, and you and your parents will be removed by force if necessary." Emma regarded him silently, her expression far older than her years. Then she turned to the mother bear who had started everything, the bear who had once collapsed, dying, on their porch and been healed by a baby's tears. The massive creature stepped forward, rising to her full height before the startled CEO. In her jaws, she held something that glinted in the sunlight, something metal that she dropped at Winter's feet with deliberate care. It was a trap. The same type of illegal bear trap that had injured her cub months earlier. Attached to it was a tag, a manufacturer's label bearing the logo of Winters Development Corporation. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment for millions of viewers watching the live stream. The CEO's face drained of color as he recognized his company's property, evidence of illegal poaching activity that had been carefully concealed from public view. "That's not... we didn't..." he stammered, but it was too late. More bears appeared from the forest, each carrying similar traps, dropping them in a damning pile. Traps set to clear valuable wildlife before construction began. Traps that had injured and killed protected species in violation of federal law. The mother bear returned to Emma's side, her massive body surprisingly gentle as she settled next to the child. Emma placed her hand on the bear's head in a gesture that conveyed both affection and profound connection. "You hurt them," Emma said, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "But they forgive you if you go away and never come back." Within a week, facing federal investigations and unprecedented public outrage, Winters Development Corporation withdrew their plans. The forest was purchased by a conservation trust and designated as a protected wildlife sanctuary. Emma became a reluctant celebrity, the Bear Girl, as headlines called her. Scientists continued to study her unusual connection with animals, though none could explain it. As for the mother bear and her family, they remained in the forest near the Morgan cabin, occasionally visiting Emma in the clearing, but otherwise living as wild bears should. The locals grew accustomed to seeing bears in the area and gave them a wide, respectful berth. No more traps were found in Pinewood Forest. On Emma's 5th birthday, Lily and Jacob took her to the clearing for a picnic. As they spread their blanket on the grass, the mother bear appeared with her cubs, now fully grown. She carried something in her mouth, a small, shiny object that she placed carefully beside Emma's birthday cake. It was a perfect pine cone, coated in what appeared to be honey and adorned with wildflower petals. A gift, Lily realized with wonder. A bear's version of a birthday present. Emma accepted it solemnly, placing it in the center of their picnic blanket. "Thank you," she said to the bear. Then, with the wisdom that sometimes came over her, she added, "We take care of each other, don't we?" "That's how the world is supposed to work." The mother bear made her soft chuffing sound. Agreement, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of a truth as old as the forest itself. A truth that had begun with a dying bear and a baby's tears, and continued now in a bond that defied explanation but offered hope for a world where humans and animals might yet find ways to coexist in harmony. Years later, when asked about her extraordinary childhood, Emma Morgan, by then doctor. Morgan, a renowned wildlife biologist, would smile and say simply, "Compassion is a universal language. Even bears understand tears." And sometimes, on quiet evenings in forests around the world, researchers would report a strange phenomenon: bears approaching humans in distress, not to harm, but to help. As if somewhere in their collective memory lived the story of a dying mother bear and the human baby whose tears had somehow saved her, creating a bridge between species that neither time nor science could fully explain. In Pinewood Forest, locals still speak in hushed tones about the bears that lived there, bears that seem to watch over lost hikers, that have been known to lead children back to safety, that avoid humans but never show aggression toward them. Bears that, some swear, can understand human tears and respond not with animal instinct, but with something remarkably close to compassion. And deep in the forest, in a clearing few people ever find, wildflowers bloom year-round in the shape of a perfect circle, as if marking a sacred space where, once upon a time, a dying mother bear saw the tears of a human baby, and both their lives were forever changed in ways that continue to ripple through the forest, the community, and the delicate balance between humans and the natural world they too often forget they belong to. 10 years passed. Emma Morgan grew from the miraculous toddler into a thoughtful teenager whose connection to animals only deepened with age. Her parents had protected her from excessive media attention, turning down countless offers for interviews, books, and even movie rights. They wanted Emma to have as normal a childhood as possible, despite her extraordinary gift. By 15, Emma had developed a reputation throughout the region as someone who could help with injured wildlife. Game wardens would quietly bring her animals too badly hurt for conventional treatment. Veterinarians would consult her on difficult cases. Even the most hardened hunters in the area would call the Morgans if they found an animal suffering. Emma never turned them away, though her gift had evolved in unexpected ways. Her tears no longer instantly healed wounds, as they had when she was a child. Instead, she had developed a profound, intuitive understanding of animal physiology, knowing exactly where to place her hands, what herbs to apply, what foods would strengthen a weakened creature, and always, always, the animals remained calm under her touch, no matter how wild or frightened they might be with others. The mother bear still visited occasionally, though her visits grew less frequent as she aged. Her cubs had long since grown and established territories of their own. The locals called her the Guardian, for stories persisted of hikers being followed at a distance by a massive bear who seemed to be watching over them rather than stalking them. On Emma's 16th birthday, as summer heat settled over Pinewood Forest, something unprecedented happened. A severe drought had gripped the region for months. Forest fires raged in neighboring counties. Wildlife struggled to find water as creeks and ponds dried up. The situation was growing desperate. That night, Emma woke suddenly, gasping for breath. She sat upright in bed, her heart pounding with a fear that wasn't her own. "Mom! Dad!" she called, racing down the hallway to her parents' room. "Something's wrong. Something's very wrong." Lily and Jacob, accustomed to their daughter's unusual perceptions, were immediately alert. "What is it, Em?" Jacob asked, reaching for his glasses. Emma pressed her hands to her temples, her face contorted with concentration. It's not clear, but it's bad, really bad. The forest is, screaming." The words had barely left her mouth when their phones began to buzz with emergency alerts. Forest fire, moving fast. Evacuation orders for their area. Jacob checked the alert. "It's coming from the east," he said grimly. "Winds pushing it right toward us." Emma shook her head. "Number? That's not what I'm feeling. There's something else." Before her parents could question further, Emma was pulling on boots and a jacket over her pajamas. "Emma, we need to evacuate," Lily insisted, already gathering important documents and photographs. The fire isn't the worst thing," Emma interrupted, her voice oddly distant. "They're trapped. They can't get out." "Who's trapped?" Jacob demanded. But Emma was already heading for the door. "I have to help them," she called over her shoulder. "All of them." Jacob caught up with her on the porch, gripping her shoulders. "Emma, listen to me. We need to leave. Now. Whatever you're sensing, whatever animals are in trouble, we can't help if we're dead." Emma looked at her father with eyes that seemed to reflect something ancient and wild. "Dad," she said softly, "do you trust me?" The question hung between them, heavy with 16 years of inexplicable miracles and undeniable truths. Jacob sighed, releasing her shoulders. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. Emma's plan was simple but bizarre. While her parents packed the car with essentials, she stood on their porch and made a sound, not quite human, not quite animal, that carried through the night air with unsettling clarity. She repeated it 3 times, then waited, her expression tense with concentration. "What was that?" Lily asked, joining her daughter on the porch. "A call," Emma replied. "I need to know if she's still out there." Minutes passed. The evacuation sirens wailed in the distance. The orange glow of fire was visible on the eastern horizon, still miles away but advancing steadily. Then, from the darkness of the forest, came an answering call. A low, rumbling, huffing sound that Lily recognized immediately. The guardian had answered. Emma's face lit with relief. "She'll help," she told her parents. "But we need to move fast. Get the truck ready." While Jacob prepared their old pickup truck, Emma gave Lily strange instructions. Fill every container they had with water. Gather all the blankets they could spare. Find rope, flashlights, first aid supplies. When the truck was loaded, Emma directed them not toward the evacuation route but deeper into the forest, along a barely visible fire road that wound toward the heart of Pinewood. "Emma, the fire," Lily began. "Is coming from the east," Emma finished. "But there's something worse to the west, something man-made." As they bumped along the rough track, Emma explained what she had sensed. A barrier recently constructed, blocking the western exit from the forest. A barrier that was preventing wildlife from escaping the advancing fire. "It's a new development," she said. "They've put up miles of fencing around the perimeter. The animals are running into it, panicking, turning back toward the fire." "How do you know this?" Jacob asked, navigating carefully around a fallen branch. Emma touched her heart. I feel it. Their fear. Their confusion. They don't understand why their escape routes are gone. They drove for nearly an hour, the fire's glow growing brighter behind them. Twice they had to stop to move fallen trees from the road. All around them, the forest felt unnaturally quiet. No rustling of nocturnal creatures, no calls of night birds. They've all fled, Emma murmured. Or they're trying to. Finally, they reached the western edge of Pinewood Forest. In the beams of the truck's headlights, they saw what Emma had somehow known was there. A 10-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, stretching north and south as far as they could see. On the other side, bulldozed earth and construction equipment sat idle, the beginnings of what appeared to be a large-scale development. And pressed against the fence, a heartbreaking sight, dozens of animals. Deer thrashing frantically against the metal links, foxes trying to dig under the barrier, a family of raccoons huddled together, trembling with fear. Even a few bears, pacing anxiously, occasionally rising up to paw at the fence. This is illegal, Jacob said, his voice tight with anger. They can't just block wildlife corridors like this. They did it anyway, Emma replied, jumping down from the truck, and now these animals are going to die if we don't help. She approached the fence slowly, her hands outstretched. The animals, which should have scattered at a human's approach, grew still, watching her with what could only be described as recognition. I know, Emma said softly. I know you're scared. We're going to help you. She turned to her parents. We need to take down a section of this fence, create an opening. Jacob surveyed the sturdy construction doubtfully. Emma, I don't think we have the tools. A crashing sound from the nearby forest interrupted him. The guardian appeared, moving with surprising speed for her age. Behind her came more bears, at least a dozen, including her grown cubs, now massive adults themselves. The bears approached the fence where Emma stood. Without hesitation, the guardian rose onto her hind legs, towering above them all. She gripped the chain link with powerful front paws and pulled. The metal groaned, but held firm. 2 more bears joined her, then 3 more. Working with coordinated effort that defied natural behavior, they pulled and tore at the fence. Jacob rushed to help, using wire cutters from his truck to weaken sections where the bears strained. Emma stood in the center of this impossible scene, her eyes closed, her lips moving silently as if in prayer or communication. Lily watched in awe as more animals emerged from the forest, not fleeing from the approaching fire, but coming deliberately toward Emma, forming a patient, orderly crowd unlike anything Lily had ever seen or imagined. With a screech of tearing metal, a section of fence finally gave way, creating an opening about 20 feet wide. Emma immediately began directing the exodus. Go, she called to the waiting animals. Quickly now, stay together. To her parents' astonishment, the animals moved through the gap in orderly groups. Deer first, then smaller mammals, each species somehow maintaining formation. There was no panic, no trampling. Even natural predators and prey moved past each other without aggression, united by the common threat and somehow calmed by Emma's presence. The bears remained behind, continuing to widen the opening in the fence. One bear, a younger male, suddenly froze, nose lifted to the wind. He made a sharp barking sound that set the others on alert. The fires changed direction, Emma translated, her face paling. The winds shifted. It's coming this way fast. As if to confirm her words, smoke began to thicken in the air around them. Embers drifted past on the strengthening breeze. We need to go, Jacob urged, grabbing Emma's arm. Now, Emma, we've done what we can. But Emma pulled away, her expression resolute. Not yet. There are more coming. I can feel them. She was right. In the smoky darkness behind them, eyes reflected the truck's headlights. Dozens of animals still emerging from the forest, fleeing the advancing flames. The Guardian and her bears worked frantically at the fence, tearing at the metal with increasing desperation as the smoke grew thicker. "Emma, please," Lily begged. "We'll be trapped." Emma hesitated, torn between her safety and the animals still streaming toward them. Then, with sudden decision, she reached into the truck and grabbed several blankets. "Soak these," she instructed her mother, pointing to the water containers they'd brought. "Dad, help me." Working quickly, Emma and Jacob draped the soaked blankets over themselves. Emma took one more and approached the Guardian, who was still tearing at the fence despite the smoke burning her eyes and lungs. In a gesture of profound trust, the massive bear allowed Emma to drape the wet blanket over her head and back. The other bears accepted the same treatment, somehow understanding that the dampness would offer some protection from the flying embers. "We need to create a fire break," Emma shouted over the growing roar of the approaching flames. "It's coming too fast. Some of them won't make it through in time." She closed her eyes, concentrating fiercely. The Guardian responded with a deep huffing sound, then led her bears to a line of dry underbrush about 50 yards from the fence. With powerful sweeps of their massive paws, they began clearing the ground, creating a crude fire break. Jacob, understanding the plan, used a shovel from his truck to help, while Lily guided more animals through the gap in the fence. Emma moved between the groups, somehow communicating, coordinating, her hands occasionally touching an animal's flank or head in a gesture that seemed to calm even the most panicked creatures. The fire crested the nearest ridge, a wall of orange and red advancing through the treetops with terrifying speed. The heat hit them like a physical blow. "Emma!" Lily screamed. "We have to go, now!" Emma gave her mother a strange, sad smile. "You and Dad go. Get through the fence. I need to stay with them." Before her parents could protest, Emma turned back to the animals still emerging from the burning forest. She knelt beside a limping fox, murmuring something to the frightened creature. Then she stood and walked deliberately toward the advancing flames. "Emma!" Jacob shouted, starting after her. But the Guardian blocked his path, her massive body forming an immovable barrier. Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, held a message Jacob couldn't understand but somehow felt. Trust her. At the edge of the hastily created fire break, Emma stopped. She spread her arms wide, her slender form silhouetted against the wall of fire. For a heart-stopping moment, Lily thought her daughter intended to sacrifice herself. But then, Emma began to sing. It wasn't a human song. It wasn't words or melody as anyone would recognize them. It was something older, something that seemed to resonate from the earth itself. A vibration more than a sound, though it carried clearly even over the fire's roar. The reaction was immediate and inexplicable. The remaining animals still fleeing through the forest accelerated, racing toward Emma as if pulled by an invisible force. They streamed past her, over the fire break, toward the gap in the fence where Lily and Jacob stood paralyzed with awe and terror. And then, most incredibly of all, the fire itself seemed to respond to Emma's song. At the edge of the fire break, the flames hesitated, swirling and dancing as if confused or reluctant. The leading edge of the fire split, curving around the area where Emma stood, creating a narrow corridor through which the last animals fled. Scientists would later attribute this phenomenon to a sudden microweather pattern, a freak updraft that temporarily diverted the fire's path. But Lily and Jacob, watching their daughter standing unflinching as flames licked around her, but never quite touched her, knew they were witnessing something science could not explain. The last group of animals, a mother deer and her 2 fawns, passed Emma and raced toward the fence. Emma turned to follow them, but as she did, a burning branch crashed down from a nearby tree. She stumbled, fell, and did not rise. "Emma!" Jacob shouted, breaking free from his shock. He started toward his daughter, but the heat was too intense. He couldn't get through. The guardian saw Emma fall. Without hesitation, the massive bear charged into the corridor of fire that was rapidly closing. She reached Emma's crumpled form and, with impossible gentleness, took the back of the girl's jacket between her teeth. Dragging Emma like a cub, the guardian retreated from the advancing flames, her own fur beginning to smolder despite the damp blanket. Halfway to safety, the guardian stumbled. The smoke was too thick, the heat too intense. She roared in pain and frustration, still trying to pull Emma to safety. Then, from beyond the fence, came answering roars. The guardian's own cubs, now full-grown, charged back through the gap. They reached their mother and Emma, surrounding them in a protective circle. Working together, they dragged both Emma and the guardian back across the firebreak, toward the fence, toward safety. Jacob and Lily rushed forward, taking their unconscious daughter from the bear's care. Emma was breathing but unresponsive, her face streaked with soot. "We need to get her to a hospital," Lily cried, cradling her daughter's head. The guardian collapsed beside them, her breathing labored, her once thick fur burned away in patches to reveal blistered skin beneath. She made no attempt to rise again, her great strength finally exhausted. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw the guardian's condition, she reached out with a trembling hand, touching the bear's scorched muzzle. "No," she whispered. "No, please, not like this." Tears began to flow down Emma's ash-streaked face. Not ordinary tears, but tears that seemed to glow with a soft, golden light, visible even in the smoky darkness. They fell onto the guardian's burned fur, onto her wounds. The bear's breathing steadied. Her eyes, dulled with pain, brightened. She raised her massive head, looking at Emma with what could only be described as love. Around them, the fire continued to rage, but it did not touch them. It was as if they sat in the eye of a storm, protected by forces no one could see or understand. "Thank you," Emma whispered to the guardian, her hand still resting on the bear's head. "For everything." The guardian made her familiar chuffing sound, then slowly, painfully rose to her feet. She nuzzled Emma's face once, a gesture of profound tenderness, before turning toward the gap in the fence. Her cubs followed, supporting their mother when her strength faltered. At the edge of the fence, the guardian turned back one last time, her gaze finding Emma's across the distance. Something passed between them, a communication, a farewell, a promise. Then the great bear vanished into the night, leading her family to safety. Emergency crews found the Morgans at dawn, huddled in their truck beyond the development site. The fire had mysteriously changed direction during the night, sparing the western edge of the forest. Wildlife officials were baffled by reports of hundreds of animals seen moving in orderly groups away from the burn zone. Emma spent 3 days in the hospital, treated for smoke inhalation and minor burns. When she was finally released, the family returned to find their cabin untouched. The fire had curved around their property as if guided by an invisible hand. In the weeks that followed, as the forest began its slow recovery, something changed in Emma. The connection she had always felt with animals seemed different now, deeper in some ways, more distant in others. She would sit for hours at the edge of the burned forest, watching new growth emerge from blackened earth, her expression contemplative. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lily asked one evening, finding her daughter in her usual spot. Emma nodded slowly. "I'm different now," she said. "What happened that night, it changed something in me." "Your gift, you mean?" Lily asked gently. "Is it gone?" Emma considered this. "Not gone, transformed. I used to feel their pain, their fear. Now I feel everything, the trees, the soil, the water. It's all connected, Mom, all of it alive in different ways." She looked toward the recovering forest. "I think that's what she was trying to show me all along, the guardian. That boundaries between species, between forms of life, they're illusions. We're all part of the same web." Emma Morgan grew up to become not just a wildlife biologist, as earlier stories had claimed, but something entirely new: the world's first recognized interspecies communicator. She developed scientific protocols for understanding animal cognition and emotion that revolutionized humanity's relationship with the natural world. The fence that had nearly doomed countless animals became the subject of landmark litigation that established new legal protections for wildlife corridors. The development company was forced to redesign their entire project, creating the world's first truly integrated human-wildlife community, with Emma as its chief consultant. As for the guardian, rumors persisted for years of an unusually intelligent bear leading her family through the recovering forest. Hikers occasionally reported seeing her watching over injured animals or guiding lost humans back to trails. Park rangers neither confirmed nor denied these stories, but they did name a newly established wildlife sanctuary on the eastern edge of Pinewood Guardian's Rest. Emma visited this sanctuary regularly, sitting quietly in a meadow of wildflowers that bloomed year-round in a perfect circle. Sometimes, visitors reported seeing her conversing with a massive old bear who came to sit beside her like an old friend. What passed between them remained their secret, but those lucky enough to witness these meetings spoke of tears that seemed to glow with golden light, and of a bear that seemed to understand every word the young woman said. In scientific journals, Emma Morgan's work was credited with advancing animal conservation by decades. In environmental circles, she was hailed as a visionary who bridged the gap between humans and the natural world. But in the small town near Pinewood Forest, she was known simply as the Bear Girl, the child whose tears had once saved a dying mother bear, setting in motion a chain of events that would eventually save an entire forest and change how humans understood their place in the natural world. And deep in the recovering forest, in a clearing few people ever found, the Guardian's descendants continued to watch over Pinewood, ensuring that Emma Morgan's legacy of compassion and connection between species would endure long after both she and the original Guardian had returned to the earth that had connected them in ways beyond human understanding. On Emma's 30th birthday, as she sat alone in the meadow that had become her sanctuary, a young bear cub approached her without fear. Around its neck hung an unusual necklace fashioned from a perfect pine cone, preserved somehow against decay, adorned with dried wildflower petals. Emma recognized it immediately, the Guardian's gift from many years ago. She held out her hand, and the cub placed the necklace in her palm with deliberate care. Looking into the cub's eyes, Emma saw something familiar, a wisdom, an awareness that went beyond animal instinct. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. "You've come back." The cub made a soft chuffing sound, so like the Guardian's that tears sprang to Emma's eyes. But these were ordinary tears, human tears. The golden glow that had once marked her healing gift had faded years ago, replaced by something perhaps more valuable: understanding. The cub climbed into her lap, circling 3 times before settling against her heart. Emma stroked its fur, feeling the rhythm of their heartbeats gradually synchronizing. Above them, clouds parted to reveal stars scattered across the night sky like tears of light. "We take care of each other," Emma murmured, repeating the words she had spoken so many years ago. "That's how the world is supposed to work." The cub looked up at her, its eyes reflecting starlight and something more. A promise continued, a bond unbroken, a story that had begun with a dying mother bear and a baby's tears, but would never truly end as long as there were creatures capable of compassion, capable of transcending the boundaries between species to recognize the spark of life that connected all things. In that moment, in that clearing, as a woman and a bear shared a connection that defied explanation, the true miracle revealed itself, not in supernatural healing or animal communication, but in the simple, profound understanding that the capacity for compassion existed in all living things, waiting only to be awakened by a moment of genuine connection. And perhaps, Emma thought as she cradled the cub that carried the guardian spirit, that was the greatest gift of all. Not the ability to heal with tears, but the capacity to see beyond differences, to recognize suffering in another being and respond not with fear, but with love. The story of the dying mother bear and the human baby would be told for generations, changing slightly with each telling, gathering the embellishments of legend. But at its heart remained a truth as simple and profound as the tears of a child for a suffering creature, that in moments of greatest vulnerability, when barriers between species fall away, what remains is not the difference between human and animal, but the sameness of all living hearts. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the pines of a forest that once nearly burned but now thrives, those with patient hearts and quiet minds might glimpse a woman walking beside a bear, their shadows merging in the dappled light, their footprints overlapping on the forest floor, a living reminder that the greatest miracles often begin with the simplest acts of compassion, with tears freely given for another's pain. This is the legacy of Emma Morgan and the Guardian, not just a story of healing tears and mysterious bonds, but a challenge to all who hear it, to look into the eyes of beings unlike ourselves and recognize not otherness but kinship, to reach across the boundaries that separate us from the natural world and find there not danger but connection. To remember that in a world increasingly divided, the capacity for compassion remains our greatest, most necessary gift. For what began with a dying mother bear seeing the tears of a human baby ended not with a single miraculous healing, but with a lifetime of healing the broken relationship between humanity and the natural world. A healing that continues, story by story, heart by heart, tear by tear, into a future where perhaps, someday, such miracles will no longer seem miraculous at all, but simply the way of a world remembered its wholeness. 20 years later, Emma Morgan stood at the edge of what was now known as Guardian's Memorial Forest. Her hair had begun to show strands of silver, and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes, signs of a life lived outdoors, in communion with the natural world. Behind her stretched a research center that bore her name, where scientists and conservationists from around the world came to study her methods of interspecies communication. She walked alone through familiar paths, her footsteps silent on the forest floor. The once burned woodland had regenerated with surprising vigor, becoming even more vibrant and diverse than before the fire. Local people spoke of it as a miraculous recovery, but Emma knew better. She had watched the Guardian's descendants tending the forest in their own way, burying seeds, clearing deadfall, creating natural fire breaks. Bears doing the work of forest stewards, passing knowledge from generation to generation. Emma reached the sacred clearing, the perfect circle of wildflowers that bloomed regardless of season. At its center stood a simple stone marker, weather-worn but still legible. In memory of the Guardian who taught us that boundaries exist only in our minds and that compassion flows between all living hearts. Emma knelt beside the marker, placing her palm against the cool stone. 20 years had passed since the Guardian's final day. The Great Bear had lived far longer than most of her kind, reaching an almost mythical age before finally returning to the earth in this very clearing, surrounded by her extended family of bears and one human woman who had once been a baby with healing tears. "I miss you, old friend," Emma whispered. A soft rustling in the undergrowth made her smile without turning. She recognized those footsteps, deliberate, careful, powerful. "Hello, Aurora," she said. A massive bear emerged from the trees, not the Guardian, but her granddaughter, now the matriarch of the Pinewood Bears. Aurora approached with the familiar confidence of an old friend, settling her enormous bulk beside Emma with a contented huffing sound. Emma leaned against the bear's warm side, a gesture that would have terrified anyone else, but felt as natural to her as breathing. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she told Aurora. "They've asked me to help with the new wildlife corridor in Yellowstone. I'll be gone for months." The bear turned her great head, eyes reflecting intelligence and something deeper, understanding. She made a soft chuffing sound and nudged Emma's shoulder gently. Emma smiled. "Yes, I know. My work isn't done, but I wanted to say goodbye properly." From her pocket, Emma withdrew a small, worn object. The pine-cone necklace that had passed from the Guardian to her cub to Emma, preserved somehow against decay for all these years. She held it in her palm, studying its intricate pattern, remembering the day she'd received it as a child and again as an adult. "I'm leaving this here," she said softly, "with her. It belongs in the forest." Aurora watched as Emma gently placed the necklace at the base of the stone marker. As her fingers released it, something extraordinary happened. Something that, even after a lifetime of witnessing miracles, made Emma's breath catch. The pine cone began to glow with a soft golden light, the same light that had once emanated from Emma's healing tears. As they watched, the pine cone seemed to dissolve, its essence sinking into the soil beneath the marker. All around the clearing, the wildflowers trembled, then blazed with momentary radiance before returning to their natural state, but somehow brighter, more vibrant than before. Emma felt warmth spreading through her chest. Not grief, not joy, but something transcendent that encompassed both. Completion, understanding, acceptance. Aurora rose to her feet, towering above Emma. The bear turned in a slow circle, her gaze sweeping the clearing as if seeing beyond the physical world to something Emma could only sense. Then, with deliberate care, Aurora placed one massive paw on Emma's shoulder. The connection that flowed between them in that moment was beyond words, beyond explanation. A communion of two beings whose lives had been linked by fate, by compassion, by the tears of a baby for a dying mother bear so many years ago. In Aurora's eyes, Emma saw not just the bear before her, but the Guardian, her spirit living on through her descendants, through the forest she had protected, through the woman who had once been a child with miraculous tears. Aurora removed her paw and stepped back. She rose briefly onto her hind legs, a pose that would have signaled aggression in any other context, but here conveyed something entirely different. A salute, a blessing, a reminder that some bonds transcend death, transcend species, transcend understanding. Then the bear dropped to all fours and, with one last meaningful look at Emma, disappeared into the forest that was her home. Emma remained in the clearing as twilight deepened around her. She closed her eyes, extending her awareness outward as she had learned to do over the decades, feeling the pulse of the forest, the whisper of wind through leaves, the quiet movements of creatures large and small going about their lives. And there, at the edge of perception, she felt something else, a presence both familiar and eternal. the guardian watching over her forest, her descendants, and the human woman who had once been a crying baby. Not gone, never truly gone, but transformed into something as vast and enduring as the forest itself. Emma opened her eyes to find tears streaming down her cheeks. Ordinary, human tears, warm and salt-sweet. She made no move to wipe them away. Instead, she let them fall to the earth of the clearing, her final gift to the place that had shaped her life. As the first star appeared in the darkening sky, Emma rose to her feet. She placed her hand on the stone marker one last time, feeling not grief but profound gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, to the guardian, to the forest, to the mysterious forces that had brought them together. For everything. Emma Morgan walked away from the clearing with steady steps, her heart full. Behind her, where her tears had fallen, tiny flowers began to bloom, golden blossoms that emitted a soft light visible only to those who knew how to truly see. And in the deepening twilight a shadow moved, larger than any living bear, yet unmistakably ursine. It paused at the edge of the clearing, watching the woman's retreating form with ancient eyes that held the wisdom of generations. Then it, too, turned away, melting into the darkness of the forest it had always protected and always would. Some stories have endings. The tale of Emma Morgan and the Guardian was not one of them. For what had begun with a dying mother bear seeing the tears of a human baby had become something timeless. A reminder that compassion is the thread that binds all living things, that healing can flow between the most unlikely hearts, and that love, in its purest form, recognizes no boundaries of species or understanding. In forests around the world, they say there are places where bears watch over lost children, where animals gather in peaceful communion, where the boundaries between human and wild momentarily dissolve. In these places, flowers bloom out of season, healing happens against all odds, and the impossible becomes, for a moment, possible. And if you are very quiet, very patient, with a heart open to wonders, you might glimpse a woman walking beside a bear, their shadows merged in the dappled light. Two beings of different worlds, united by the most powerful force of all, the tears of compassion freely given, with no expectation of return. For this is the legacy of Emma Morgan and the Guardian, not an ending, but an eternal beginning. A reminder that in our most vulnerable moments, when we reach across the divide to recognize the suffering of another, we touch something divine. Something that, like the wildflowers in the clearing, continues to bloom long after we are gone, illuminating the